Brette.
Hey, Lonnie.
I'm Ilana Horn,
I'm Brette Garner.
and we're here to talk about a book we just wrote, which is called Teacher Learning of Ambitious and Equitable Mathematics Instruction, a Sociocultural Approach. It's not a snappy title.
No, but it does pretty well explain what we have in the book. We take a sociocultural approach to study how math teachers learn to teach more ambitiously and more equitably.
Yeah. So we're thinking that this is a book that might be of interest to other folks who study teacher learning, or math coaches, or teacher leaders who are trying to help their departments grow their practice. So we hope that there's a lot of you out there who might want to engage in what we have written here.
Yeah, and I think it would be especially interesting to folks who get frustrated with the sort of best practices, tips and tricks kind of rhetoric in schools, because we really try to grapple with the complexity of teacher learning, because teaching is really hard.
Teaching is really hard. And also, if you're a practitioner or a teacher leader and you've found that you've kind of like leveled out in terms of what you've been able to do in growing your practice, it might be of interest, because we get inside some of what is going on and what limits people in terms of their development. So we have two main sections of the book. The first section is where we really talk about our theory of teacher learning, the sociocultural one. And we talk about, we do a review of other scholarship that takes a sociocultural approach to teacher learning, and we critique it from a perspective of Jean Lave's theory of learning theories, which the three things that Jean Lave says need to be in a complete learning theory are subject-role relations, the telos, or how concepts develop, and then the mechanism, like how the learning actually happens.
And when we read a lot of the literature on teacher learning, we found that a lot of research doesn't actually take all of those things into account. And so if we're not specifying how people interact with the world and how they're learning in particular contexts, and what it is that we hope that they're learning towards, like what it is that we actually want them to be developing. And if we're not also outlining the mechanism for learning and how the learning process actually happens, then we really don't get the whole picture of teacher learning.
Yeah, one of the things we found when we were reviewing the literature is that there's a lot of stuff out there that kind of conflates the learning activity, whatever the particular intervention is, with mechanism. So we try to sort that out a little, and we hope that that helps people make more robust designs and clearer analysis for their own studies of teacher learning. So that's the first section. And then in the second section, it's our empirical part, where we use our framework to look at some teachers learning.
Yeah, some cases of some really wonderful teachers that we worked with in a project called Project Sigma. And so they're all experienced secondary math teachers, and they had a variety of things that they were trying to work on themselves. And we developed a video feedback process to be able to give them feedback on their instruction targeted towards the things that they wanted to work on and that they wanted to improve on.
So there were 12 teachers. They all worked in a large urban school district in the US. And we built case studies of their learning. And the nice thing about the intervention, the video intervention that Brette is describing, is not only was it supportive of their learning, but it also provided us with a really rich data set over the period of 3 years to follow their growth and development. So we share that in the second part. And I think we should probably share with the folks a couple of our main findings. What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think one of the things that was really interesting is that we chose these teachers as sort of a best case, theoretically selected them as best case teachers, in the sense that they were all members of a professional development organization that gave them over 100 hours a year of really high quality professional development. Just to give you a sense of how unusual that is in the US, average urban school district math teacher gets about 12 hours a year, and we don't know much about the quality of that.
Yeah.
So these were people who had a lot of resources to support their learning.
Yeah. And they also had a shared vision of what good math instruction looks like. And that was super important for our study as well. Because they were a part of this professional development organization, they were well-versed in ambitious instruction and had goals for their students of understanding mathematics conceptually, of making sure that all of their students were learning, using collaborative group work in class, and things like that. So they were already in a really good place with their instruction.
Yeah, and they were pretty savvy too about the way that schooling as a structure was marginalizing some of their students and figuring out ways to advocate for their students and help them navigate those structures. They had a good dose of criticality as well about schooling and how it works. So it was a pretty amazing group of teachers to work with. And with all those resources and assets in place, there was still a lot for them to learn. And so that's really what we document here. And there were a couple of things that I found particularly interesting. One is that, first of all, everyone had something to learn. And the most common site of learning was the phase of the lesson that we call the monitoring phase, where they handed off the mathematics to the kids and the students were in charge, and they had to respond sort of in a more improvisational mode to what students were doing.
Yeah, and it turns out that part of class is really, really complicated.
Really?
There are so many different students who have all of their own ideas and interactions and different dynamics, and figuring out who do you talk to, when do you talk to them, what do you talk about, when do you leave and go talk with another group? That makes things really complicated. And so even though the teachers we were working with were really, really great, like they're excellent,
super thoughtful,
really thoughtful teachers, but they still had things that they wanted to know more about, things they wanted to get better at, and questions that they wanted to discuss with us.
Yeah. So we think that this has a lot of implications for a lot of the goals that we have as a field of mathematics education and education more broadly, of that we have these visions of responsive teaching practice that we want to see normalized in schools. And even these incredibly well-resourced teachers, from a learning perspective, really kind of had a limit to what they were able to do without more class-specific feedback. And we know that instructional coaching is something that is often a thing, but unfortunately, I think in practice, instructional coaching is usually used to raise the floor rather than raise the ceiling. And these teachers, because they were well-established, well-respected, they knew their curriculum really well, they weren't getting a lot of feedback in their instruction. So one of the implications of our work is that all teachers need to have productive, non-evaluative feedback on their teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Another big thing that came out of our study was that a lot of teachers carry what we call the baggage of the binary, and that in order to be vulnerable enough to open up your classroom to getting feedback, you have to sort of disband with this notion that you're either a good teacher or a bad teacher. And the idea that good teachers always have good lessons and things always go well, and bad teachers, in contrast, never do. A lot of our teachers really had to work through that and to understand that they could still be good teachers. Like they're really excellent professionals. They're good at their jobs.
So thoughtful.
And yet
again,
there's stuff that they might want to do differently, they might want to change, or something that didn't quite land.
Right.
And that's really not, that doesn't reflect negatively on who they are as humans or who they are as teachers. It's just part of life that no one is perfect.
Yeah. So I think that, the stance we take on teaching is that teaching is highly uncertain, and that I think that the theory we develop points us to ways of thinking about responsive forms of practice, which is probably applicable to scholars outside of math education as well. And so we hope you read our book. We've given you some highlights, but there's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
And feel free to reach out to us if you have thoughts or questions. Our hashtag is Teacher Learning AEMI. And we'll check the hashtag now and then and respond to your questions.
We hope you love our teachers as much as we do.
Yeah. Bye.